I've published peer-reviewed research on why people cheat. Here's how to never get cheated on. This will all apply to men and women. We'll divvy this into 3 parts: mate selection, mate retention, and spotting infidelity. We'll keep it research-backed the whole way through, citations below subtitles. I'll give you over a dozen actionable pieces of advice with timestamps to make it easier to follow. I really do just want to create the most useful document possible on this topic. So first, mate selection. When picking a partner, what are some red flags that they might cheat and green flags that they probably won't? The first thing I think you want to attend to is their degree of extra-pair interest. That is, their physical attraction to people other than you. McNulty's study found that individuals who were 100 milliseconds quicker to disengage attention, look away from attractive alternatives, were 50% less likely to cheat. And this extends online. Dorn and Price's analysis of over 20,000 people found that consumers of online explicit content were 101% more likely to report having had an affair. And that's consistent with other research. So I would ask yourself, is this person fawning over celebrities? Are they following Instagram models? For your red flag, green flag comparison, it's sensible to ask on a general level, do they have a wandering eye, or is their focus on you? I know it's very trendy and in vogue to pretend that physical interest in others is completely meaningless, and it can be. And some degree of extra-pair interest is completely unavoidable. You will never find someone who is only interested in you. But let's not downplay it too much. If a person fantasizes about, stares at, and searches other people online, that reflects at least some aspect of their desires. So high extra-pair interest doesn't mean they're definitely going to cheat, but it definitely makes them more likely to cheat, statistically, than a person who is thinking about you, keeping their eyes on you, and using their internet connection to mostly look at dog videos. That's number one. The second thing that I would say is, as tempting as it is, as natural as it is, try not to mate out of your league too much, right? Don't strive. Humans evolved to capitalize on their own mate value. So if you're dating someone who can do much better, eventually they probably will. This is a pretty mainstream take on the evidence that more attractive people tend to be less satisfied in relationships and less committed as well. It is hard to be satisfied with your choice of meal when everything is on the menu. People, especially men, frankly, often think, oh, I want to date the hottest person I can get. I think women are savvier about the trade-offs here, as they will often say they would rather date someone medium ugly or ugly hot. And I take that to mean that they want someone they find attractive personally, but not like a David Cornsweat type who's just gonna be drowning in attention and competitors constantly. And I think that's strategically prudent. Like, frankly, my philosophy, once someone is past a minimum threshold where you find them attractive, their looks don't actually add that much to your life. Like, I'm in a long-term relationship. If my girlfriend was 10% less beautiful, it would probably make my life better. Because for my part, right, I would love her just the same. Our connection rests on deeper things. But it would push her towards the more crowded part of the normal distribution, such that way less guys would be trying to talk to her. I'm quite docile. The whole, hey buddy, she's with me thing, it gives me no pleasure. Past a certain point, more beauty, more handsomeness, it just means more suitors for their attention. So I think it's rational to think of desirability as a bit of a trade-off. My advice isn't to date people you don't find attractive, but if you want stability and monogamy from a partner, don't just go for the most attractive person who reciprocates your interest. I would say that once they pass whatever your minimum threshold for attractiveness is, you'll have a much richer life selecting for deeper character traits in potential mates. Speaking of character traits, let's move on to possibly the most important concept to be familiar with here: sociosexuality, someone's propensity to seek out and enjoy uncommitted mating. One-night stands, friends with benefits, that sort of thing. Study after study finds that people who really like that sort of arrangement are more likely to cheat. And so you can reduce your odds of getting cheated on substantially by treating someone liking that sort of behavior as a red flag. And if uncommitted mating really isn't someone's vibe, well, that's a green flag. This is sometimes controversial, but you have to remember that cheating is a form of uncommitted mating. Like, that's the mechanics of the activity. And so if someone doesn't even like doing that activity when they're single, they're far less likely to be tempted to do it when they're in a committed relationship. Now, a lot of people use quote unquote body count as a proxy for sociosexuality. And yeah, look, at the population level, body count does predict cheating. To give you an idea, in McQuivey's analysis, people with a body count above 5 were about twice as likely to cheat as individuals with a body count below 5. There's nothing magical about the number 5, that was just how they split the data. But number of past partners is only a rough approximation of personality and sociosexuality specifically. If you're talking to someone who's 20 years old and who has slept with 5 people recently, all one-night stands, that suggests a totally different underlying personality and inclination to a 30-year-old who has slept with 5 people, mostly in committed relationships over the course of a decade. This is something very well described and investigated by my collaborator, Dr. Andrew Thomas. The number matters, sure, but so does the context surrounding the number. Using body count as a measure of someone's likelihood to cheat is almost like using body weight as a measure of strength. Yeah, heavier people are stronger than lighter people on average, but for an individual person, you can't just look at their body weight and say how strong they are. You'd want to ask how much of this is muscle, how much of this is fat, and it's the same in this case. I think the main thing that you would want to be sensitive about when learning about someone's past is to what extent and in what way does this past behavior inform me of who this person likely is today. I think that's a more reasonable approach. Now, quick side note, a lot of people will say about all this research that correlation doesn't equal causation. I'm sure some people have commented that before even reaching this part of the video. And I've got 2 things to say on that. First, some of this is within participant longitudinal research that gets pretty close to causation, and some of it's experimental, which gets even closer, right? These are designs that in some cases strongly suggest causality. That's number one. Number two is that correlations still matter. The whole correlation isn't causation phrase is commonly misunderstood on the internet to be like, oh, correlations don't matter. But correlations can still be informative regardless of if they're causal, especially with partner selection. Like, for example, maybe viewing online explicit content is just an indicator of their underlying personality, right? Maybe it's not causal at all. Or maybe it is causal, right? Maybe it builds bad habits or subjects real-world partners to invidious comparisons. But as far as choosing a partner is concerned, it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter why this behavior has predictive value. What matters is that it has predictive value. Whether it indicates personality or causality, it's an indicator all the same. Continuing on our character theme, it's good to be familiar with the dark triad. Psychopathy, that's basically how callous someone is. Machiavellianism, essentially how strategic and calculated they are. And narcissism, their preoccupation with themselves. That's an oversimplification. A proper deep dive into this area, which is not my expertise, would probably take 45 minutes. But I think the important broad strokes thing to know here is that people who are higher in these three traits are more likely to cheat on you. And if you spoke to a subject matter expert, I'm sure they could tell you many specific signs to keep an eye out for. But I think a simpler way to approach this is to assume that how someone comports themselves in general is how they comport themselves with regard to you. That is, to what degree are they concerned with their own personal priorities and callous towards those of others? This should be intuitive. If you're talking to someone who cheats on their schoolwork, cheats their business partner, cheats their boss, cheats their employees, cheats their friends, you can't be surprised when they cheat on you. Okay, so we've covered a constellation of personality traits. Let's move on to the most unfortunate thing to be aware of, and that is family history. Look, you guys listen to me because I'm honest about this sort of thing. I promise. It gives me no pleasure to share this, but infidelity runs in families. It's partially heritable. That is, it's partially genetic. Some research indicates that it has similar heritability, ballpark, to borderline personality disorder at around 40%. If you found someone who came from a family where basically everybody in it had borderline personality disorder, it would be totally normal and sane to think, oh, maybe this person has BPD tendencies as well. In the same way, if you found out that someone came from a family environment with lots of infidelity, it'd be totally normal for that to give you pause. Partially because it indicates something about their nature, and partially because it indicates something about their nurture, their environment. And speaking of environment, you should also be interested and attentive to their broader social milieu. Humans are a very social species. Our behaviors have a contagious element, and infidelity is no different. Birnbaum and colleagues found that experimentally exposing people to the infidelity of others made them less faithful in their own inclinations. That is, cheating is contagious. And it's not just that. If someone is choosing to be friends with people who cheat on their partners, I think it suggests that maybe they don't think it's that bad. A rough heuristic that I like to apply when trying to better understand someone is that they are their friends, right? A person's friends are at once the people who influence them and the people they choose to associate with volitionally. So by looking at someone's friends, you get two clues about who they are for the price of one. You're probably not dating the only faithful guy in the frat house. You're probably not paired up with the only woman on the bachelorette trip who wasn't chatting up guys at the beach club. You're probably not that lucky. It's unlikely that you're dating someone who is the most faithful person in their social circle, but they're probably also not the least faithful. So if they're hanging around with really loyal types, that's a green flag. Now we'll move on to mate retention in a moment, but first I'll say the final and most important and also most obvious element of personal history. Have they cheated on someone before? Bit of a no-brainer, so I won't dwell on it, but Knopp's longitudinal study found that if an individual cheated in their last relationship, they were 3 times more likely to cheat in their next relationship. Not quite once a cheater, always a cheater, but pretty darn close. I think I'm allowed to say that. And here, as a side note, a bit of a warning to wrap this section up, Knopp also found that if someone was cheated on in their past relationship, they were about twice as likely to be cheated on in their next relationship. And you might think, oh, Mackin, that sounds terribly unfair. But think about this in the context of the information I have shared thus far. Some people are attracted to the qualities I mentioned in this video, right? I remember speaking to a female friend of mine, a really great person to be around, and she said, you know, Mackin, this is your expertise. Tell me how to get a good man. And I told her basically what I told you just now. Pick someone in your league with a tamer sexuality who doesn't exhibit antisocial traits and who comes from a low infidelity, familial, and social environment. And you know what she said? She said, that guy sounds boring. And I get it. Look, a lot of women find narcissistic playboy types sexy. And a lot of guys, you know, they just want to date the sexiest woman regardless of her character traits. I mean, I get it. I get what these people are saying. But if those are your mate preferences, statistically, you're just more likely to be a repeat infidelity victim than someone who's selecting for deeper virtues. Hence why people who've been cheated on are more likely to have it happen to them again. So for mate selection, I mean, it's mostly old school wisdom backed by new data, really, right? If you want to reduce your odds of getting cheated on, in summary, pick someone in your league from a relatively chaste background and social environment who exhibits good values. Your grandparents would tell you the same thing, but you want to hear it from someone who's gonna cite a bunch of studies, and I get it. I'm the same way. Now, a note on my philosophy here, I personally would not choose someone just on statistically reducing odds of getting cheated on, right? I think there's lots of things that are important in a long-term relationship, and we want to optimize for a broad array of goals, rather than just mitigate one risk. And at the end of the day, if you fall in love with someone, none of this is really gonna matter anyway, right? It's probably not even gonna make it onto your radar, and that's probably for the best. I mean, look, let's not outsmart ourselves here. Millions of years of evolution have honed our brain to be excellent at mate selection. So if you have a really good feeling about someone, despite red flags like the ones I've mentioned, that's not nothing, right? That actually does mean something. However, I still do think it's good to be aware of this stuff, hence why I made this video. Now, what about mate retention? What about people who are already in a relationship? How can they avoid being cheated on? First, if you don't want to get cheated on, don't cheat on your partner. Signal commitment, signal loyalty. People who cheat get cheated on more, statistically. In fact, in my data, the third most common reason that women cited for cheating on their male partners was revenge. They wanted to get even. So if you want someone who's laser focused on you, you have to be laser focused on them. I've spoken to some people, very high status men especially, who are looking for one-sided open relationships, right? They get to do whatever they want, but their partner has to stay loyal. I want to be non-judgmental, so putting the ethics and fairness of that sort of relationship aside, looking at the practicability, it is very unlikely, in my opinion, that their partner will be loyal to them over the long term under this sort of arrangement. Once I say this, you'll see it everywhere. These guys who have this sort of relationship, I've noticed, tend to be quite controlling of their partners. And I think that's because they know that if their partner feels strong temptation, she just won't have that feeling of reciprocity stopping her. She'll eventually be in a scenario where she wants someone else, and instead of thinking, well, he'd never do that to me, she'll think, okay, how come he gets to have all the fun? That's my loosely data-backed opinion. And I've also heard multiple people report that after they caught their partner cheating, their partner, ironically, became more jealous of them. And it's because of this exact phenomenon. Their partner was worried about the comeuppance. So, a bit of a lengthy one, but number one, if you don't want to get cheated on, don't cheat on anybody. Be monogamous, project your loyalty, and make sure your partner is confident that you are faithful. Number two, invest in the relationship. Keep the relationship happy. In our data, we found that relationship dissatisfaction was the number one stated motivation for infidelity in both men and women. And that's consistent with past research. Now, I would say with infidelity, temptation factors mainly set the table, and relationship dissatisfaction is just what gives you permission to eat, right? Like, it's probably not a motivation in and of itself in most cases. If you didn't want to sleep with someone else, you probably wouldn't do it just because your main relationship is unhappy. The only scenario where you'd see that was if the cheater was trying to force a breakup, like they wanted to get dumped, which is a real thing. People do it, but rare, right? In my sample, it was sub 5%. So relationship dissatisfaction is a push. What's the pull, right? Why do people cheat? Well, I've covered this in other videos, but cheating is a physical act, and so physical motivations are quite salient. In our quantitative data, we found that men and women tend to cheat up in terms of physical attractiveness. They tend to find their affair partners more physically attractive than their primary partners. So one cool implication of this is that looking nice is probably a protective factor against infidelity. Like, the better looking you are, the more difficult it would be for someone to cheat up on you. Research from Cole and colleagues, and also from Meltzer and colleagues, indicates that people tend to quote unquote let themselves go in relationships. I think we all know this. And I think to an extent that's natural and even desirable, right? You don't want to have to put on this aesthetic performance for your whole romantic story. But I would caution against completely letting yourself go. Odds are you were probably your partner's hottest option when they picked you. While it's natural to relax that a little bit, if your narrow concern is them cheating, you probably want to keep that status, right? You probably want to look your best. Similarly, while it's natural for the bedroom to become a less fun location as years pass in a relationship, you don't want it to become a boring location. In my sample, just under 1 in 10 men and women who cheated said that part of it was that they were unsatisfied in bed. So I would say, don't mail it in. This is an important and special aspect of your life together. And in a monogamous relationship, you're the only person that they can take part in that aspect of life with. So that's a lot of responsibility. Take it seriously. I don't think anyone wants to hear me get too specific about how to make that part of life better for your partner. Frankly, I think most of you know. The problem most likely isn't lack of know-how. It's just that people tend to get kind of lazy about these things over time. I recommend you resist that tendency, keep it fun, and most of all, if I could say just one thing, try to appreciate them in this aspect the same way someone new would appreciate them. And if you don't, maybe someone new actually will. Not trying to scare you. Anyway, third, I would say close the distance. Around 7% of the people who cheated in my data set brought up long distance as a factor. And that sounds low until you remember that most relationships are not long distance. And then in that context, it sounds kind of high. It's not decisive evidence, but I would say that it indicates that long distance is a risk factor. It just creates a lot of opportunity for infidelity, and people get lonely. So it also creates motivation. Look, I've done mega long distance faithfully. It can be done. I don't want to scare anybody, but if you are doing it, I just say see each other as much as you can and try to put a timeline on it, right? Try to have an end that is reasonably in sight, or a plan to end it. That's the long distance, not the whole relationship. So to review broadly my advice for not getting cheated on, if you're already in a relationship, if you've already chosen your person, is to first be loyal to them. Second, keep investing in the relationship in all ways, including through your appearance and in the bedroom, and try to close the distance if you're in a long distance relationship. Now, finally, how do we recognize the signs that someone is about to or actively cheating on us? That's a good question. And there are the classics that I've seen over and over and over again in anecdotal cases of infidelity. Their partner is starting to take a greater interest in their own physical appearance, their partner becoming more private about their technology, like taking their phone with them when they go to the bathroom and just never leaving it unattended, unaccounted for gaps in their partner's schedule, potential changes in their sexual behavior or treatment of the relationship. And really, I've seen that in both directions anecdotally. Like, it's not that things necessarily consistently get better or worse with an affair, it's just that they tend to get different. But I think my worry is if I tell you all these detailed signs, some of you in loyal relationships are going to start overanalyzing things, because realistically, anything short of actual evidence, it means nothing. Instead, I unironically think the best thing to be aware of when quote unquote trying to detect infidelity is human evolution. For hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, if you want to take the long Australopithecine estimate, the human mind has adapted to romantic pair bonds. And the fact that you are here suggests that your ancestors had at least some success in detecting and avoiding infidelity. I am shocked by how often I have spoken to people who have been cheated on who said to me that they knew before they knew, based on very little evidence. Oftentimes no hard evidence, just gut feelings. Your brain evolved to synthesize cues to infidelity and let you know if something is wrong here. There's very good theoretical reason to suspect that the brain is likely oversensitive in these matters. A common idea in my field, the smoke detector principle, suggests that it's strategically better to be suspicious and wrong than to be not suspicious and wrong. For the same reason, it's better for a smoke detector to be oversensitive than undersensitive. Because if the smoke detector goes off and there's no fire, well, that's a bit annoying. But if it doesn't go off when there's a fire, well, that's a disaster. The same likely applies to our evolved psychology. So you don't want to trust your gut to the point where you're unable to accept evidence that your gut feeling was wrong. In the same way that if the smoke detector went off and then you went to the area and you saw that there was no fire, it would be ridiculous to still remain convinced that there was one based on the smoke detector going off. However, that said, by that same light, if the smoke detector goes off in your house, you don't just think, oh, it's nothing. You check if there's a fire. So if you have a strong bad feeling, look into it. And conversely, in your day-to-day, let your guard down a little bit. You're not vigilant to your house burning down 24/7. You just trust that the smoke detector will tell you. In the same way, if you're in a relationship, you have an infidelity smoke detector. Evolution gave you that. So relax and enjoy the relationship. Assume that your partner is not like that. And trust that if they are like that, your evolved infidelity smoke detector system will probably give you a heads up. Now, for a big picture summary here of the whole video, while I do not think it is optimal to choose a partner solely based on reducing your probability of getting cheated on, if you want to avoid getting cheated on, you ideally would want to choose someone with a tame history and inclinations, from a low infidelity background, in all senses of that word, which we reviewed. And then when you're in the relationship with them, you want to be loyal yourself and keep the relationship happy, and hopefully keep each other nearby. And when it comes to detecting whether someone is going to cheat, you have an evolved smoke detector. So enjoy your relationship. Don't think too much about this stuff. Trust that if something is off, your brain's gonna tell you, most likely. And if it does tell you, if you have a bad feeling, obviously look into it, but also know that your jealousy, your intuition, it's a smoke detector. It's very likely to be oversensitive to fire. Thanks for listening. Let me know in the comments what you want me to cover next. Until next time.